You're listening to the New Frontier Network with Chris Iverson and Victor Vigiani.
Welcome to NFN, the New Frontier Network, where we explore the new frontiers of phenomenology, ufology, and exopolitics. We're glad you could join us here today, and with me is my usual partner in crime. He is
Victor Vigiani, and on the other side of the microphone is my good
Chris
friend
Iverson.
Yes, for Chris Iverson, for sure. Great to have a chance to be again with you, Chris. We've a lot of waters come under the bridge, so why don't you start us off?
Sure. We have here today slightly different format than we've had in our first several interviews. We have had startup in the UFO and phenomenology world a brand new international organization called ICER. And with us today, we have, besides our normal panel, Francisco Miral Correa from Portugal, and down from Peru, representing the Southern Hemisphere, is Giorgio Pacenza. We have with us from ICER, we have Gary Heseltine and Eamonn Ansbro. Welcome, gentlemen. We're glad to have you here with us. And you are a formidable organization, large organization, international organization that has jumped into the fray, and the timing for it couldn't possibly be any better. What with the Department of Defense finally releasing and recognizing, to a certain degree, the existence of the unknown. So welcome, gentlemen, and we're glad to have you with us here today. Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you.
We have with us the approach that we take, and we're glad to have everybody with us today, is that we are pushing the boundaries, as we like to say, of what is going on out there. We're not here to discuss events that happened necessarily 50 years ago or 60 years ago or 70 years ago. We're here to examine where we are today and how we are pushing those boundaries, as we indicated, the frontiers of what is going on. And with that, why don't we, I think we have a little bit of a biography and background that Victor can provide to us about ICER and you gentlemen first, and then we'll get into your role and what's happening currently here today.
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize the biographical information of our two guests, Gary Heseltine and Eamonn Ansbro, because both of them have been leaders in their own field in totally different ways. Gary has done one thing with his background in the UFO research community, and Eamonn has done something totally different. So we've got two completely different perspectives on, first of all, the UAP issue. And I'll let our listeners know that I'm going to be using the term UAP and UFO interchangeably. So, but both of these individuals have really set a high bar with respect to their own involvement with respect to the UAP. Vice President of ICE, he's a former police detective, and he's the vice president of the International Coalition for Research, Extraterrestrial Research. And it's composed of scientists, academics, and leading UFO researchers worldwide. This organization was launched in 2021. Gary has honed his own officer-trained police skills to examine cases with the best evidence that have had a high caliber of witnesses with knowledge often corroborated by technology. He also has concluded through his interaction with this issue on circumstantial evidence that some unidentified objects act as intelligently controlled craft that are behind their operative movements and likely to be extraterrestrial or non-human in origin. And also, I should have mentioned that Gary's also the coordinator and author of the UFO Monthly magazine and look at the UFO Data magazine. Now, as far as Eamonn is concerned, Eamonn Ansbro he has a Master of Science, a Master in Philosophy, and a doctorate. Okay, and he's from Ireland, and he's done research on the old world cases going back to the 1800s. That's something we want to get into later on. The most reliable multi-witness cases of about 1,300 were used as a theoretical model that eventually showed precise patterns of a global level of interaction for over 140 years. That sounds fascinating. So the discovery of this modeling demonstrated specific orbital tracks around the Earth that were used by UAP, and I know we're going to be getting into that a little bit later on. So with respect to that, Gary, I'm going to throw it to you, just a question to you. Just could you just briefly outline the kind of history as to how ICER developed, and a few things about its history and where we're going with it?
Okay, thank you for that introduction. ICER began really about 3 years ago with Roberto Panotti and Don Schmidt being asked to go to China, which is kind of a strange thing, but a Chinese UFO group invited them to go to China. I think they went 3 times in total to have meetings with this Chinese UFO group. We never knew whether it was an official backed group by the Chinese government, but they went, and from that they were basically asked if they could contact many of their respected colleagues in the field and try to put together a coalition of countries with the aim of eventually reaching 30 countries that I think from their point of view would have some recognition UN-wise eventually if you get to 30. So from that, Don contacted me and said, did I want to go to Moscow? Because there was going to be a joint Russian-Chinese conference in Moscow. And I'd always dreamed of going to Moscow. So I jumped at the chance, and I ended up going there in October of 2018, which is a long time ago now. And literally, we, 8 of us, I think, met with the Chinese group. And over 3 days, we established some kind of basis to say, okay, we'll try to create this coalition. Now, one of the things that we asked for as a show of good faith was that, okay, they told us they were going to back this with money. They were supposed to create a conference in the February of 2019 in China. That didn't happen. They said that something had happened internally in the country and it didn't happen. So we kind of waited and waited and nothing happened. And so we decided amongst ourselves that we'd probably give it until October of 2019, which would be the 1-year anniversary of that Moscow conference. And then we got to October and nothing heard. So we concluded that the Chinese initiative, for whatever reason, wasn't going to happen. And then, of course, we twiddled our thumbs a bit. By then, we'd probably approached 19 or 20 other representatives potentially for this coalition. But we didn't do anything. And of course, then early March 2019, 2020, we're looking at the pandemic hitting town, and that was a whole new variation. And then when the pandemic hit, the world started to do something that it hadn't really done before. And this is probably one of the few positives of the pandemic, is that people started to use Zoom all the time as the only way to communicate with relatives, friends, etc. So suddenly, whilst everybody had maybe tampered a bit with with Skype, suddenly Zoom was all the thing and everybody was using Zoom. So I thought, right, I'll take out a Zoom Pro account. And in June of 2020, so just after the big pandemic began, I took out the account and then started contacting the people from Moscow, and then started to say, look, we've got this goodwill. Why don't we see if we can go on our own? And by then, what had happened was that when we were in Moscow, the original group appointed Roberto as the vice president. But of course, when the Chinese dropped out and their leader of the Chinese group was going to be the president, in a sense, there was a president vacancy. So we all universally moved up, and then Dan, one of our national representatives from Romania, suggested that I be the vice president. and that was voted in. So that's how I became the vice president. So literally we had this goodwill, we didn't want to lose it. And literally since June, we have met 2-3 times a week with ever increasing frequency, and especially in the run up to the launch. We decided that we were going to create a launch pack for all of the representatives. And by the time of the launch, we were at 27 countries. I can announce, perhaps on this show for the first time, that we've actually now identified 2 new representatives. So we're now going to be moving with a public statement probably tomorrow to 29 countries, which is Switzerland and France. So again, more of a global impact. But yes, that's where we are. So we launched on the 25th of May, deliberately 1 month ahead or what we anticipated as the potential date of the DNI report. And amazingly, after being told that it was never going to come out on that day, it did. So we were literally a month to position ourselves. And we're in what we would call phase 1, which is establishing ourselves as this new international group, which may take 6 months, may take a year, but we're in our establishment phase of where we're really trying to gather ourselves as a platform to say, look, we should be looking at this subject on a global approach, because there is only one Earth and there is only one human race. So we should look at it as one species, one race. And the other thing as well is we are the only organization that's really tackling the question of what if. Now that's the halfway house for the public and the media to say, well, what if actually this is going to turn out to be extraterrestrial non-human, rather than just hit a brick wall in a year's time, maybe, when suddenly the authorities have to conclude, yes, it's extraterrestrial non-human, we can't explain it. That would be psychologically profound, I think, not only for virtually everyone, but some people, I think, would, mental health wise, would have issues with it. And we've seen through the pandemic that lockdowns have created a huge mental health issue, unresolved because of the lockdown, etc. So we think that we should be making people aware now. And we're still trying to get that message across. But as part of that process, we're already creating a variety of what we call awareness programs. I guess you'd call them educational programs, initially based on the rich evidential history of this subject that, as we all well know, goes back 70, 75 years. So that's where we're at now. And I think that's probably the introduction that you wanted.
Yeah, Chris, I know you have some views and commentary on the fact that ICER represents 29 countries. What are your questions to Gary or to Eamonn with respect to how globally representative ICER is?
The ICER is a very different approach, which is really good to see. It's international, as you indicated, with 2 more by the time this is aired. You will have publicly announced the fact that Switzerland and France have joined the ranks. So it is good to see. There have been a few other organizations out there that have attempted to cross over and break down some of the boundaries between people and countries. And it is wonderful to see us taking that approach. I myself, just to take a step back on that, several years ago when I was in Phoenix, met somebody from China who came in with a stack of, he had sightings and reports and everything else, and they were actually fairly open there about it. It's too bad that the Chinese representatives did not continue with this. But I guess the question that I see is that as you move forward, obviously the one big thing that you came in here before was the DNI report, but there have been other bits and pieces of information that have been released in other countries. Between the UK, with the Ministry of Defense, has released information in the past. In fact, one of the members of the Ministry of Defense, very famous Nick Pope, we've interviewed on here as well. And information that he was privy to. And with Eamonn, same thing with Ireland. Not quite as familiar with Ireland, but what is it that you are looking for these different countries to bring? It seems as though all 29 countries are probably at a different point in the process of releasing information, right? So to try to find that common ground, and how do you plan on leaning upon each other or utilize each other's experiences in other countries to perhaps move that process along in other member countries?
Do you want me to answer that, Eamonn, or do you want to answer that?
I'll just have a brief on it,
Go on,
Gary,
go on.
Chris.
Go on, you go.
Yeah, I think it's really important for such a conglomeration of countries, as this organization called ICER, is detached from this American-centric approach and history that's been there, which has really, I feel, contaminated the whole UAP area for the rest of the world. So indeed, Chris, having ICER is a breath of fresh air, and that's the reason why I joined it. And from there, you know, you can spearhead new initiatives which have never been done before. ICER is not an organization dealing with investigations, where most of the ICER representatives have done all this stuff, you know, to do with detection systems, collating data, et cetera, et cetera. We're going into the next phase, which is required because thanks to the Pentagon, you know, that the UAP exists. Of course, we do it all along, but I think it was an important trigger point for the likes of ICER entering the whole scene, and very timely indeed, as you mentioned there, Chris. So over to you, Gary.
It's a big question, what you asked there, but essentially what you've got to realize is that, as I'm sure you do, is that the world is changing now on this issue, or we hope that is not going to go back to the stigma. We're hopeful that with the new US Navy stroke DNI approach for further investigation, the coordination of the Army, Air Force and Navy to report, the reporting system, the fact that there's going to be more research in the next 3 months, and there's going to be another classified section. It all points to the fact that maybe America has woken up to the fact that they cannot keep the data from the public anymore. They can keep a lot of it back, undoubtedly, but when the 3 videos were released in December 2017, it effectively let the genie out of the bottle. And for the first time, and I say it a lot, but for the first time, the media could go, what is that? It was something tangible that they could get their teeth into. And I'm hoping that they will really begin to do the investigatory job that perhaps they should have done a long time ago. But they've been a victim of this cover up as well. You know, there are 2 camps that would say they're either complicit or they're victims. Well, if we say they're complicit, they'll never talk to us. So I think we best go down the line of saying that they're victims. And we want them to take the lead now and go down the investigatory route, kind of like the Watergate. Get your teeth into this. This is a really big story, the biggest story in the world, potentially. That's what we would say, because we know that it affects pretty much everything else. So let them start to really delve into this. And at the moment, what I think you can see from the often very poor questioning by the media is that they're in a bit of a what I call a halfway house, where they don't realize really what to ask because they have no depth of knowledge. Yes, they've all heard about flying saucers, they've all heard about Area 51, they've all heard about UFOs, UAP, etc. But in terms of actual knowledge, evidentially, they probably have only 5% knowledge. So most journalists are working from a very, very narrow band of information. And we want to kind of try to speed that up and say, look, start talking to ICER. Let's get ICER onto TV, especially in America, where we can be then more seen as a global player. And then we can start talking to millions of people about the fact that we need to prepare, that countries need to prepare. Now, we're not in it for money. How many swimming pools do we need? Seriously, we're in it as a not-for-profit, in for the long haul. So we're doing it serious. You know, this is an international NGO registered out of Portugal. This is a serious effort to take and address this issue at the highest levels of governance, and hopefully towards the UN. The UN is harder to do, but if we create a body of work over the next 2 or 3 years, we would hope to achieve special consultative status at the United Nations. That's when you can get close for a country, and it has to be a country that asks questions. So maybe we would be adopted by perhaps a smaller country, maybe, that says, yes, I like what this group is doing on this subject, and we will start to ask questions on their behalf as a nation in the UN. There is a protocol to that. So what we have at the moment is still very limited, but we are the only international organization that's truly international. We're the only organization that's taken a common oath that we have all had to agree and sign to become a national representative or a deputy national representative. So that's something that's never happened in ufology before. And realistically, perhaps if we had done better historically with the likes of NICAP and other big organizations, but it was very American centric. If there wasn't so much infighting between groups in the past, maybe we would have been more in a position to have more political sway or be a bigger influence on the national scale or the world scale than what we would have been. But that hasn't happened. So maybe this ICER has been potentially the first truly international platform to start to gather that political power, if that's the right word, to cause some influence. This is still our setup phase, but we believe that eventually, as a not-for-profit NGO, that we're hoping that some countries go, actually, this organization, ICER, are way ahead of everybody else. They are planning for a different reality. So we are going to approach them and say, look, we would like you to implement your awareness programs that you've created, which are designed for all sectors of society and from children probably of 10 or 11 upwards. You know, so we're designing them for all sectors of society, all of which could be replicated in each of our 29 countries. So for example, let's say in a year's time, Portugal says, okay, Francisco, you're the national representative for Portugal. We like what you're doing. We think that you're right. This is going to go down the line of a conclusion that we're dealing with something off-world, non-human. So we do need to prepare the Portuguese public for that. We want to now give you a grant of X amount of money to start creating awareness programs, start teaching, trickling down, train the trainers, that kind of thing. So this is kind of what we envisage in that area. But I think what we also envisage is that when we do have some breakthroughs, for example, like Andrea Simondoni, our Argentinian national representative, she has already sat down with the Ministry of Defense, the minister for the Argentinian defense, and talked and said, I'm now part of a big international organization called ICER, and we think that you should be preparing things now. And more, I think, discussions are going to be ongoing. So that's perhaps the first breakthrough we've got on that international scale. But the more and more that the data, in particular in the US, from the Navy, the Air Force, the Army, is coordinated, the more that the scientific research is done, the more ICER is confident that there's only one conclusion, that the technology is way ahead of anything that we can produce, and it's going to point to some kind of off-world non-human intelligence interacting with planet Earth. So that's going to eventually start to hit home. It's not there yet because I think the media are finding it difficult to get their heads around it. And we're in this halfway house. But I think 6 months, 12 months down the line, I think we'll be much closer to this reality than we've ever been in, I should suspect, all of our lifetimes.
Well, with respect to all of that, Gary, the international part of this, I want to throw this to Francesco to perhaps, I know he's eager to ask you questions regarding the international confirmation of what ICER is doing. So Francesco, do you have any comment on that and where we're going with respect to international initiatives?
Regarding international initiatives, well, I can only comment, and I should not comment because I should be placing questions, not commenting on ICER. And I ask for that role in terms of making any comments. My questions go to, and I have three questions: one for Eamonn, one for Gary, and another one eventually for both. Eamonn, as an academic, how challenging is it for you, or how challenging has been throughout the years to manage the UFO issue, and how do you see the future once the this DNI report came out and more media, and you see Avilov and other important academics coming forward regarding the ET hypothesis. How do you see this potential cooperation between the academic world and civilian researchers?
Oh, that's a big one. Yeah, well, I think just a little brief on background. I've spent about 30 years researching the whole UAP UFO area. And actually my first, interested enough, I'm leading up to your answer, hopefully, and have been in the SETI arena for, well, at least 20 years now, particularly the UK SETI Research Network. So I'm familiar with all the guys in that arena to do with SETI. Met them many times in conferences and so forth. However, I've also studied the key individuals, the psychological side of where they're coming from. And that was important for me personally to get an understanding of, you know, how open-minded are they? I'm talking about over, say, 20 years now, this. And yes, I have had challenges. In fact, my first paper that was submitted to a major journal, which was to do with the model, the orbital tracks around the Earth of UFOs. Now, I didn't use the word UFO because I understand that mantra is a no-no area. So I used other language. However, I was sniffed out that this was UFO stuff. And in fact, I had to get a lawyer, which was unprecedented for this journal, to make sure that my paper was going to be published. Now, you might say, well, you know, if a paper is rejected, you know, tough luck. Well, that wasn't the case because I presented the paper. I was invited to present, which I did. And in fact, at the SETI conference, and this is about 20 years ago now, and I was completely ostracized. Now, I'm just giving you an example on a personal basis of the challenges that I've had to go through as a scientist, okay? And sorry, there's a lot of noise there. There's a lot of background noise. I just about hear myself. So I was ostracized at this conference after I presented, and I wasn't invited to the dinner. And the next morning, one of the key guys came to me and said that we have a problem with your paper. And I said, well, I have no problems at all. I have all the data here. And anyway, it went on like that, but I had very little support. I was literally an outlier, that's the best way of putting it. But because I was dealing with the truth on this, and that I was so I was in a paradox, you could say. So eventually, as I said, I got a lawyer in, and in fact, at the end of the day, it wasn't even necessary for the lawyer to go to an advanced level in this case, because after about 5 months, I had to water down you know, what was in it. But the main core stuff was in it, actually, in the paper. And it was published. Now, that was a really important paper because others around the world had noted what this was about. And then from there, I was getting invitations from the European Space Agency to deliver the same paper. And there was an awful lot of interest in this. So it seems like there's a cultural thing we have a problem with. Certainly whatever it is with the American culture, I honestly thought, I because I probably wasn't exposed enough to the American society and the American way of thinking, I honestly thought they were an open bunch of people, you know, including in the sciences. And I was completely wrong. In fact, I found more interest in the Eastern European bloc and Russia with the material that I've been dealing with. So I'm not too sure I'm answering your question here, but I've had, besides rejected papers, I've been banned from conferences as well, even up to 2018. And I had 2 papers submitted to pretty big conference. It was all, SETI was the major part of it. And paid for everything, all my hotels, bills, flights, the whole works. Cost me about 2,000 euros at the time. And then I got this email from the chairman of SETI, who should be nameless, and it's in block capitals. The committee have studied your papers again, and we've decided they're not acceptable. And secondly, please do not come to Bremen in Germany. So I'm just giving an example of the type of stuff that I've had to go through. By the way, I don't take this emotionally. When I'm on a truth on something, I just spearhead it through. I just, you know, go through like butter. It's not an issue for me at all. When I mean, there's been so much stuff you wouldn't believe it. I mean, another one was the Royal Society, which happened in 2019. And there was a quiet word in my ear that this was an exhibition in the Royal Society in London, you know, where you have about 50 or 60,000 people coming through. And I was to be on the stand with a few other SETI scientists, some of them from America. And there was a word put in my, it was about 2 months beforehand, and said, look, if you're going to attend this, we're going to leave the stand. So that's the type of thing I've had to deal with, okay? By the way, as I said before, repeat myself, that's not an issue for me, all right? Other people may be falling on the wayside with this kind of stuff, but you really have to have a hard neck in this one if you're alone or doing it. And in one sense, I enjoy it. I see it as a big game because I've studied all these people very carefully, and I have the right language, I think, for them as well. I mean, I was invited there just 3 months ago to to be one of the co-authors for this academic book, which is to do with extraterrestrial intelligence, the academic and societal implications. And I had to ask the editor, "Are you sure you got the right person, you know, for this?" and she said, "Well, we've been checking around. We found that you're totally different to anybody we've come across." And I said, "Well, where'd you get my name?" And she said, "Oh, we got it here." "Oh, okay. Well, can you just send a theme of what you're going to write about?" Well, I said, "How open-minded are you?" I said, "There's no definition to open-mindedness. You know, you can actually affect somebody up to a certain level of open-mindedness as within that measure." So anyway, I sent the theme off to them, and I got a big surprise. They said, "This is exactly what we're after." I thought, what? Fantastic. Right. So I'll go to town on this. So actually, that's now been published. And Avi Loeb actually is one of the co-authors in it. So I've never met the guy, but I think we're in good company. You know?
Right.
I'm laughing at all this stuff because I don't get me wrong. Yes, I take it serious, but I have to enjoy it as well. I know there's a lot of bullshit out there. Yeah, anyway, I'll leave it at that. So
just let me come in a little bit there, because when he talks about personal experience and cause and effect, the reason why I left the police force in 2013 was because there was increasing pressure been brought upon me because of my work with the creation of the police database that I created and went public in January of 2002. Now, initially, I told them exactly what I was doing. I was a serving detective constable, and there was no pressure initially at the start, although my detective sergeant said, this might not be very good for you. And I said, well, I don't tell you what to do in your spare time. I'm just going to do it. And so anyway, at first there was no problems. And then it would be little things like, well, we've seen your website. We don't want you to say that. We don't want them to use your collar number, you know, because they're badge number, for want of a better phrase. Okay, so I couldn't do that. And then they said, we don't want you to actually mention which force you belong to. Okay, you can say you're a police officer. Yeah, okay. And that kind of thing. And then eventually I was actually disciplined for what they said was bringing the force into disrepute. When I think it'd be 2008, 2009. In fact, it was 2009, it's just reminded me. When the Ministry of Defence suddenly decided to close its UFO desk, it was done very quickly with no forward publication, no announcement. And then they closed it on the guise of cost-cutting exercise. So anyway, I thought, well, okay, where are all the public reports going to go to? They're still going to happen. So, well, you know, where they're going to go, be sent. So I wrote to each of the chief constables, because in the UK you have 43 different county forces, regional areas. So there's 43 different chief constables. So I wrote to 39. I didn't have enough stamps, so I only wrote to 39. So I wrote to 39 and said, you may not be aware of this, but the Ministry of Defence have just closed its UFO reporting facility that has existed for over 50 years. And I beg to say that you're going to need to deal with these cases from the public. You need to be professional. Could I suggest that you maybe forward them to me? And I'll be what was called a single point of contact, a SPOC. SPOC. So anyway, two forces immediately wrote back to me and said, thank you very much for telling us this. And we will adopt you as our SPOC, and we will send any cases that are notified to our officers and send them through to you to investigate. And I thought, wow, made a major breakthrough here. Another 24 said, thank you very much. We're going to look at this at future command meetings. So I thought, whoa, if two do it, I'll probably get more. And then I got pulled over to go see my area commander, who was a chief superintendent. And he said, the chief constable, a new chief constable for my own force, had just received a phone call from allegedly another chief constable who'd said, who is this UFO nut that you've got working for your force? Something like that. And because of that, my chief constable apparently felt embarrassed because of the other chief constable's comments. And so he rang up my area commander, chief superintendent, and said, I want this man disciplined for bringing the force into disrepute. Now, what you don't realize is that, well, you might realize that when you're in a big, big organization, it's very little that you can do if the force turns against you. It's very difficult to fight that. And you might win the war, but you'll be out of the job. So I had a career, a pension, and basically I was subject of what was called misconduct hearings. And in the end, they said, you should have told us that you were writing to the chief constables. And I said, well, everybody knew my interest. I didn't think I had to. You knew what I was doing. Of course I was going to write to them. And it was literally, they just exploited that fact that I hadn't officially told my area commander. And so on that, I'd supposedly embarrassed the force. Now, I could have tried to fight it. I did try to fight it as in a limited way, but in the end, you can't. So if you're what you call federation rep, your union rep is saying, look, if you keep fighting this, they'll find a way to sack you. So in the end, I had to plead guilty and say, yeah, okay, I should have told you, sir. And you get done. But that got me a 12-month written warning. And that was your job potentially online, because you only get one of them. So I thought, no, if they really want to go after me now, they'll find a way through some loophole. They'll find a way, some expense form. Oh, you didn't submit an expense form, something like that. They'll find a way. And I'd actually seen it in other ways happen to other officers. So it's something that you don't mess with. And of course, I had many years in at that point. So by 2013, it was not a great situation for me. And so I thought, no, I'm going to retire early. I could have gone on for another 7 years, but by then I'd already made my mind up to resign or to retire after 24 years and then create UFO Truth magazine, an online magazine. And that's exactly what I did. Within a month of retiring, I'd created the magazine and off we went. And we've been going now for 49 issues. So I'm glad I did that, but it got very uncomfortable at the end, and that was just public pressure. You know, I could have understood if I'd have chained myself naked to the Houses of Parliament with a big sign on me saying UFOs are real. That would have been bringing the force into disrepute, and I could have understood that, but I didn't. I wrote a very professional letter, and I was dealt with very professionally by the other forces. So I actually thought I'd done them a favor. But if a force decides to give you a hard time, they can make life very difficult for you. So I thought the writing was on the wall, and no, I didn't feel comfortable, so I left.
You answered part of my question, because I was going precisely to ask you about your past in the police department.
Well, there you go. No, I've never hid this, but it was uncomfortable because not only when you get the 12-month written warning, that means within that 12 months, if they decide to get you on something, they can sack you. So that was quite a nerve-wracking, especially for my family at the time and things like that. So that wasn't a nice atmosphere to be in at that time.
The follow-up question would be, right now, after the DNI report, this admission from the U.S. Defense Department that UFOs are real, and ICER being creative, did you left any open door inside the police department where you can eventually reach old colleagues of yours or someone where you can have some exchange of information?
Well, actually, the recent 10-minute dialogue in the House of Lords in the UK that happened after the release of the DNI report has actually given me a bit of an insight, because Baroness Goldie, the defence minister, stood up and said there's nothing in the last 50 years that's happened in the UK to say that there's anything in our airspace that is a threat. Now, I would argue, just from an air safety aspect, any object that's unidentified is potentially an air threat. So on that basis, she's left herself wide open for me to now go back to the police helicopter case that I recently released the footage about from 2016, which is a bona fide police FLIR video, forward-looking infrared video of an object moving against the wind, that's in the UK airspace that I fully investigated through FOI, and say, well, actually, Baroness Goldie, what about this? And this is a case on FLIR footage, which is very reminiscent to the FLIR footage that's been released by the US Navy pilots. And so, again, it's left the door open. So I think I am going to challenge in the next few weeks or seek a meeting with her. I'm also got the other people who spoke in that 10-minute debate, and one or two were more sympathetic, saying, are we taking this seriously? Because the Americans are, shouldn't we be doing a new study? And those people I've got their details for, so I'm going to write to those. Unfortunately, I am having a knee replacement operation next Tuesday, which is going to take me out of walking around and transport for 5 or 6 weeks. But I can do the letter writing, but I'm going to request meetings with Baroness Wilcox of Newport, who was very kind of questioning of the government. She's a Labour peer, the Labour Baroness, and she asked that repeated question to Baroness Goldie, you know, we should be taking this seriously. So I'm going to approach her to see if I can have a meeting August, September, hopefully, when I'm up and around and can fully travel. And I would like to see if she will allow me to give her a briefing about ICER. And then what I plan to do then is start going to the police forces again as vice president of ICER, saying, look, the world has changed a bit since you last heard of me. And they were probably sent a letter saying, this guy's been disciplined, don't go near him. But actually, even though I was in the police and technically disciplined, I still used to be sent information by the police, 2 of those police forces that had adopted me. So I have got official records saying, speak to DC Heseltine, British Transport Police, he will investigate this on our behalf. Now they're valuable documents for me because they prove that the system worked. And if it hadn't been for being disciplined, I think it would have led to a whole number of police forces that I'd have been dealing with, and how much information I could have gleaned from them, who knows. But there's nothing to stop that process starting again. And obviously now in the role of a vice president, which sounds quite important, from a police to a chief constable, you know, and the fact that in a sense I'm representing 29 countries, global approach, they're now going to, I think, say, well, yeah, maybe we should be looking at this. Can you please start coordinating your helicopter data that you, or any other footage? Because I'm aware of 3 other police helicopter incidents in the UK, but only one ever released its footage. So now that footage is out there, again, the genie is out the bottle. I can now go back in a different capacity with a degree of maybe backing of a large organization to say, look, can we start a new dialogue? But my
We
first
certainly could. Yeah, you certainly come in with it. I was just going to say, you certainly now in your position at ICER, you come in with a certain level of gravitas. Hopefully. That you're not just this, this ex-cop who, you know, was looked at cross-eyed because of his interests. Yeah. You now obviously have an international organization behind you, and it varies, you know, by country, as you indicated here in the United States, or Eamonn had indicated in the United States here, some of the difficulties from an academic standpoint, and obviously the government and the military. However, for a very different perspective, we have Giorgio, who has worked extensively with the folks in Peru and other South American countries. And it seems to be a very much more open dialogue that is created there. Is that not correct, Giorgio? And I know you have some comments about that and insight for Gary and Eamonn.
Yeah, when I was a civilian advisor to the Peruvian Air Force, there was much more openness in general. We heard generals openly stating publicly, oh, the phenomenon is real and we may not be alone in the universe. Something that we are hearing again in 2021, more officially by the United States, but it was commented openly on national TV a few times, many years before in Peru. What I see from these new developments is that the Peruvian military may support more the civilian advisors in the future, because what they basically did is, open the office and basically let us, without any resources or any indications or any much more interest, do our thing, meet when we could. But after all of these developments, there should be much more serious interest. Anyhow, I wanted to ask Eamonn mostly regarding how civilians can not rely on military research and statements and official statements from governments. I see ICER as an opportunity for civilians to gather evidence that is repeatable scientifically. And this is why I want to ask Eamonn regarding the ICER contact project, and if there is any confirmed evidence that has been testable.
Okay. Yeah, I think there's two. I think there's three parts to your question, is there? Okay. Yeah, I think you're talking about the research I was doing into the global, what I call the UAP global surveillance, and indeed, as you quite rightly said, Giorgio, we have a confirmed evidence that it is testable, which means you can test this as an experiment in different locations around the Earth at specific times within the tolerances of the model itself. And we've tested it out in 8 countries at 27 locations, and we've got an 80% correlation of events that may or may not occur. It's no guarantee as such, but it does actually prove that the model works. I hope that answers your first question. The contact part, yes. Having researched that area for a long time, and I think it's important for any scientist that is open-minded to explore all this. And there's so many different facets to the UAP, and one of them is the contact area, which I've researched out many years ago. And in fact, before there was any, official, announcements by the Pentagon and so forth, I felt I was streets ahead of anybody of what I was dealing with, and actually had presented in a funny way to SETI, particularly the UK SETI Research Network, in the last 5 years. Lucky enough, the UK SETI Research Network is quite a liberal place, or a liberal group of people, scientists, where if you were to present it in SETI, you'd be literally shot down. In fact, you wouldn't be able to attend. And I think there's something about the UK. Maybe they've all seen Monty Python and they're used to wacko stuff. So I think when I come along, they're expecting some some interesting stuff. So actually, I have presented the technologies behind this back in 2017, I think it was, and how it can be done for contact with ETC, well, what we would call in SETI extraterrestrial civilizations. But the UAP comes into that, because what I figured out is that with these, we'll call them extraterrestrial interstellar travelers, we're in our space-time as physical beings, but these guys are operating in space, but no time, at times, that is, in their interstellar travels. So if you were to use the electromagnetic spectrum in order, say, to communicate, it's impossible, it's futile. You'd have to be using a different radiation. And this is where the whole quantum physics comes into it. And so we've still on the development now of the technology for this, but also I presented the protocols and a template for how the contact can take place. But this was actually for extraterrestrial civilizations. But when you bring in the UAP, which I couldn't do, of course, within the SETI framework when you're presenting, this all fits in beautifully. So, so all that work that's been done in the past can be applied within ICER as a whole new project. One of the policies and remits of ICER is to come up with projects for the future that others may not dare do, we'll put it that way. But this is on a global scale. And this is the wonderful thing about ICER. It's totally global. So for something like this project, ICER's contact project, which I proposed there, I think it was about 2 months ago. So there has been a positive outcome from it. And this is can be done on a global scale. Now, I'm using the word global carefully here because you'd have to have specific nodal points for this to work. And it does indeed bring in, okay, people that have a wide sensory system. You don't necessarily have to be a contactee, extraterrestrial contactee or whatever. As long as you've got a wide sensory system, that would be a fundamental part of this, because the process of actually doing the contact work brings in the not just the scientific technological side of it, but also the experiential. And this is where the contactee comes in. So the contactee or the experiential side is plugged into this. It has to resonate with this for it to take place. Now, why would you say, well, what do you need technology for all this? Well, it's important to have bells and whistles in this game, because I can tell you that in Western society, they need bells and whistles for this. So, I mean, you could have millions of people have had contact, but so what? It's not going to have any effect, through the mainstream. And I've known this for years ago. So the only way around it actually is to do what I'm proposing. So it's technology and the experiential combined together. And there are other tools as well that we've tested out, which work and much more efficient than other tools we've come across. And I'm not too sure I'm answering your question there, Georgia.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. And I congratulate ICER for accepting this project as well, because it brings a whole new credibility to civilian research. If we get the evidence that we are seeking, if it is repeatable, if it is as strong as you claim, and I think we should do it. I think we should do it.
Yeah, I think also what's wonderful having ICER as an organization is that the UN link is important. So there needs to be somebody in ICER that, let's say, okay, in SETI, just to let you know, the SETI Permanent Committee of the International Astronautical Federation is the only agency that has the remit to tell the United Nations Space Office that we've had contact. And then there's all these protocols you go through. There's a whole template for this. Okay. Likewise, I would see ICER doing the same thing. And you could be damn sure SETI won't have a chance. They're not going to have contact. It's completely futile what I've seen in all the 20-something years I've been in that game. So I think this is disruptive technology. I suppose for scientists, it'll be so wacko and way out. But the thing is, it's for us, little team that we've been working on this for a few years, it's normal. This is into quantum mechanics, quantum physics, the whole works, So I'll put it this way. I'm personally not diluting my energies and consciousness for all the BS that's going on in SETI and all the other scientists, okay? I know there's been broadcasts at the moment, so I hope to God they're not listening. But I don't really care. If people want the truth in this can be spearheaded all the way through to get contact to take place, and it's so exciting, this whole area. In fact, well, I leave it at that because
I think it's a good place to kind of bring some sort of closure to it.
Can I just
congratulations?
Yeah,
it's a very good idea.
Yeah, I'll just finish off here. Yeah, I'm gonna let you comment here in a second, Gary. What I think we've done here is opened up over the last 45 minutes to an hour. We've opened up an initialization of what ICER is all about, and there are literally, as far as I'm concerned, another 10 or 15 issues that we have to deal with respect to public awareness and to the preparation for the UN, etc. So we are going to get you guys back for sure to do part 2 of this interview, because we just can't leave it at this. So Gary, with that, you have a final comment?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, we're talking in terms of what is, for the public, an largely unsuspecting public, a very difficult area to look at, which is the contact, which in a sense is a later phase in ICER. But what I was going to say is that Eamonn is to be applauded and ICER will embrace the technology and back him as a global entity, like as Giorgio said, is if we can get this repeatable, demonstrable scientific method worked, that's going to be of huge benefit to the world. And everybody wants eventually to have a level of contact once contact has been acknowledged. So
Yeah,
that's what's coming.
Yeah, I mean, this disrupts everything, you know, in the whole philosophies, the humanities, you name it. SETI would be just literally phased out
And
if
we
we
won't,
succeed at this.
and we won't depend on official or military statements to come out.
Thank you, Georgia. I forgot about that. Yes, this is a civilian operation. We're not aligned to any government. And actually, I can tell you this one. I'm absolutely convinced that the extraterrestrial different groups are monitoring all this kind of stuff that's going on. Of course they are. So therefore, when you make this big effort, hopefully, to what we're doing in ICER and in as many aspects, and one of these projects, which is hopefully will be a major one, the contact one, you can be damn sure actually this will be monitored, and you never know, we might even get help.
That would be good.
In fact, we may not need any help at all. We just get on with it, make the contact.
Francesco, you have, you have a comment. Go ahead, Francesco.
Yeah, I would like to place a question. It's not about ICER. It's about the follow-up of the report in 90 days or less than 90 days now, in late September. What are we expecting, or what may we expect from that? Is there any danger scenario of a follow-up report denying everything and just saying, well, in the first report, we could not explain 99.4%, but now we can explain another 20%. And maybe in 90 days, like in February or March, we can have a full explanation for the all 144 cases that were analyzed. Is that a credible scenario?
I don't think it is. I don't think it is at all, because with everything that we're learning, how do you take back what Luis Elizondo says with dealing with something that travels at 13,000 miles an hour, that pulls 600, 700 Gs? That kind of stuff is out there. You've got 143 pilots who can't identify what they're looking at, which is basically what the report for me was the biggest thing.
But there's a history of...
The history would say
dismissive.
It's a possibility, but I think the cat is out the bag. I don't think they could even attempt to put that genie back in the bottle now.
Yeah, could I just mention something what Gary mentioned there, just in addition to that, and this is, I haven't seen this anywhere yet, but when you take all these pilots, Navy ones, Air Force ones, etc., and they've had, we'll call them close encounters of a reasonable distance, you can be damn sure that there has been contact already made. They may not realize it, some of these pilots. It goes through different layers. In fact, Giorgio probably knows a lot about this than I would, but it goes through different layers of consciousness, like through the dream state, and that's penetrating through. Now, the reason I mention that is that in one of the Luis Elizondo, in the Richard Dolan show, I think it was, this 8-hour marathon thing, but somebody asked the question, why was Luis Elizondo selected for ATIP? And he didn't exactly answer. But there was something else that was asked, and I mean, what I read into it, one would have to look at the recording, but what I read into it was that I think he's an experiencer. And he actually smiled at this guy as if, yeah, I'm an experiencer. In other words, I've had contact or something. But, you know, one would need to research that out further, but that would be my suspicion. But just going back, yes, I think that I'm hopeful that some of these pilots will eventually come out, but on a personal interview type basis. You won't find this, it's too much of a stretch to have it in a government document coming up. I can't see that, but it has to come from the bottom up. And I think the pilots actually could play a role in that for their personal interviews, whereas you only need one to say, yeah, I've actually had contact. Yeah, this is what I'm getting. If you just have one, then it could be a domino effect.
Yeah, I think, as I said earlier, there are so many unanswered questions, and so many of them, with respect to the public domain, are really unanswerable because they really don't have a foundational amount of information to put forward. I just want to sum things up by indicating that if you want more information regarding ICER, you can go to their website. It's ICER.network. And the entire, I guess, array of information that you might want to find out, including a video and the mission statement, is all right there at the ICER.network website. So I want to take this opportunity to thank Eamonn and Gary for this. And Chris, I'll throw it back to you.
Thank you, Victor. This has been fascinating. It is wonderful to see the international approach that you gentlemen are taking within your organization. It's something that we have been doing here at NFN. On today's interview, there are 6 people from 6 different countries here represented. And we've taken that approach from the beginning. We believe it, as Eamonn indicated earlier, that it needs to be more than just a US-centric, even though it is the 800-pound gorilla in the room and can kind of control what's going on. They're at least taking those steps to recognize that which has been out there for quite some time in terms of information, data, studies, education, papers. It's been incredible. But again, thank you very much for joining us here today. There is certainly much more to cover. We have another report coming out from the DNI in the not too distant future. We are also very interested in hearing what you gentlemen think about what are the big items next that we can expect to see. What should we see? How are we going to be able to deal with it? And what should we do in response to what it is that is going to happen? So from us to all of you on the edge of the new frontier, keep your eyes forward, and we'll see you next time.
You've been listening to the New Frontier Network.